The screech of tires tore through the quiet of Maplewood Lane, a sound so raw it seemed to claw at the air itself. 13-year-old Ethan Caldwell, his electric wheelchair humming beneath him, froze mid-turn. His heart slammed against his ribs as a black SUV, its windows dark as midnight, swerved onto the curb just feet away. The vehicle's engine growled like a predator cornering its prey. Ethan's hands tightened on the joystick, his dinosaur-themed stickers glinting under the afternoon sun. Before he could react, two men in crisp navy uniforms leapt out, their boots hitting the pavement with a thud that echoed in his chest. They weren't cops, not real ones. The patches on their chests screamed Community Oversight Task Force in bold white letters, but something about them felt wrong, like costumes pulled from a cheap thrift store. Their mirrored sunglasses hid their eyes, but their postures screamed control, the kind that didn't ask for permission. "Stop right there, kid," the taller one barked, his voice sharp as a blade. He was lean, with a buzz cut and shoulders that suggested he'd spent years lifting more than just clipboards. The other, stockier with a shaved head and a sneer, stepped closer, his hand twitching like he was itching to grab something. "You blew through a stop sign back there," he said, pointing vaguely toward the intersection. Ethan had just crossed an intersection with no stop sign, no light, just a faded crosswalk barely clinging to the asphalt. Ethan's voice caught in his throat. There's no sign," he stammered, his politeness a reflex drilled into him by his mother. Born with muscular dystrophy, Ethan had learned early to navigate the world with caution, but he'd never felt this kind of fun here, not in Maplewood, where neighbors waved and sprinklers danced on perfect lawns. The bald man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "That's what they all say. You're a hazard, kid. These sidewalks are under our jurisdiction." He reached for Ethan's wheelchair, his thick fingers wrapping around the frame. Before Ethan could protest, the man yanked hard, jerking the chair sideways. The front wheels skidded, and Ethan's body lurched. Then came the kick, a deliberate, steel-toed boot slamming into the chair's side, catching Ethan's leg in the impact. The crack of bone was unmistakable, a sound that sliced through the air like a gunshot. Ethan's scream followed, high and raw, a sound no one in Maplewood could ignore. Across the street, in a modest ranch house with roses climbing the porch, Clara Vance saw it all. At 74, Clara was no stranger to pain or power. For 2 decades, she'd worked cage-side at mixed martial arts tournaments, stitching fighters' faces, resetting bones, and staring down men who thought they were invincible. Her hands, steady as steel, had saved lives in the chaos of blood and sweat. Now, as she watched her grandson crumple in agony, those same hands curled into fists. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she set her coffee mug down with deliberate care, opened a drawer, and pulled out a worn leather satchel. Inside was her old medic kit and something else. A sleek, ebony cane, its polished surface hiding a core of reinforced steel. She slung the satchel over her shoulder and stepped outside. The air on Maplewood Lane felt heavy, charged with the kind of tension that makes birds fall silent. Ethan's sobs cut through the quiet, his hands trembling as he clutched his leg. Blood seeped through his jeans, staining the denim dark. The bald man leaned in, his voice low and mocking. "Next time, you'll respect the rules, kid, or we'll take this junker chair for good." "Excuse me." Clara's voice was calm, almost soft, but it carried a weight that made both men turn. She stood at the edge of her lawn, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, her tracksuit unassuming yet somehow commanding. In one hand, she held an ice pack. In the other, her cane rested lightly against the ground. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, locked onto the men. "You just broke my grandson's leg." The tall one squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim control. "Ma'am, we're operating under task force protocol. This is official business." Clara's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "No, this is assault." She took a step forward, her cane tapping the pavement with a faint, deliberate click. "You ever hear of the carotid sinus? Press it just right, and a man's heart stops in 10 seconds. I've kept fighters alive through worse, but I've never had to start that kind of trouble. Not yet." The bald man scoffed, but his eyes flickered with unease. Back inside, lady. This doesn't concern you. Clara tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. You kicked a 13-year-old in a wheelchair. It concerns me plenty. She stepped closer, now just 5 feet away, her presence filling the space like a storm cloud. The men shifted, their confidence cracking. They weren't used to this someone who didn't flinch, didn't back down. Clara's cane gleamed in the sunlight, its weight a silent promise. She didn't need to swing it. The threat was in her stillness, in the way she stood like a wall between them and Ethan. The tall one tried to regain ground, holding up a clipboard as if it were a shield. This area is under our oversight. Emergency traffic directive. Your kid's a liability. Clara's voice stayed low, but it cut like a knife. There's no task force here. Maplewood's community board was disbanded 3 years ago after a fraud scandal. You're not enforcers. You're imposters. She nodded toward the bald man's trembling hand. And you're not very good at it. The air shifted. Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by Ethan's screams and the growing standoff. Mr. Delaney, a retired mechanic, stood on his porch, phone in hand, recording. A teenage girl across the street paused her bike, her camera already rolling. A young mother, groceries still in her arms, pulled out her phone and started streaming. The men noticed, their bravado faltering under the weight of a dozen lenses. You think you can scare people with fake badges and clipboards? Clara said, her voice steady but laced with steel. I've seen men twice your size cry for their mothers in the ring. You don't have the guts for this game. She leaned slightly on her cane, her eyes narrowing. Would you like me to explain how fast a radial fracture can end your career? Or how a single twist can make you wish you'd never stepped on this block? The bald man took a step back, his face paling. I didn't touch you, he muttered, as if pleading. Clara's smile was cold. But I could have. She glanced at Ethan, who was watching her through tear-streaked eyes, his pain momentarily forgotten. You okay, kiddo? She asked softly. He nodded, his voice a whisper. They're scared of you, Grandma. Good, she said, her gaze never leaving the men. The bald man made a mistake then. He reached for Ethan's chair again, his hand brushing the armrest. Clara's cane moved faster than anyone expected, not to strike, but to intercept. It snapped down between his hand and the chair, the impact against the pavement ringing like a bell. One more move, she said, her voice low and final, and you'll be sipping dinner through a straw for the next decade. That's not a threat. That's physics. The men froze. Sweat beaded on the bald one's forehead, his bravado crumbling. The tall one's eyes darted to the growing crowd, to the phones, to the faint wail of sirens in the distance. Real sirens, not the kind from TV, but the steady, inevitable approach of actual authority. Clara tilted her head toward the sound. Time's up, boys. The patrol cars arrived moments later, their blue lights casting long shadows across Maplewood Lane. 2 officers stepped out, a man and a woman, their uniforms crisp and unmistakably real. Clara stepped aside, her cane still planted like a sentinel. He's the victim, she said, nodding at Ethan, whose face was pale with pain. They're the suspects. And someone needs to get my grandson an ambulance before I start practicing my old stitches. The female officer knelt beside Ethan, her voice gentle. Hey, buddy, hang in there. Can you tell me your name? Ethan, he gasped, clutching his leg. It hurts. I know, sweetheart. Help's coming. She glanced at Clara, a flicker of respect in her eyes. The male officer turned to the imposters. Identification. Now, the bald man opened his mouth to argue, but the officer's stare silenced him. The tall one fumbled for his wallet, producing a flimsy card labeled Community Volunteer. The officer barely glanced at it. No such thing in this county. You're not even licensed security. Clara spoke up, her voice calm but firm. I advised them to stay put. My cane might have helped with the persuasion. The officer's lips twitched. Effective. Been doing this longer than you've been shaving, Clara said dryly. EMTs arrived, carefully lifting Ethan onto a stretcher. The crowd grew, neighbors murmuring with a mix of rage and awe. They attacked a kid in a wheelchair. Mr. Delaney said, his phone still recording. She stopped them cold, the teenage girl added, her video already streaming to hundreds. As the fake enforcers were cuffed, the bald one glanced at Clara, searching for mercy. She raised an eyebrow. You had your chance to walk away. Now you get the spotlight. The officer overseeing the arrests turned to Clara. You know this is going viral, right? Half the county's watching already. Clara shrugged, adjusting her satchel. Good. Maybe it'll teach the next ones to think twice before targeting a kid. The story didn't end on Maplewood Lane. By nightfall, the video had exploded online, racking up 500,000 views. It had everything: a vulnerable boy, corrupt imposters, and a grandmother who dismantled them without raising a fist. Ethan, now in a hospital with a cast on his leg, was surrounded by gift cards from teachers, memes from classmates, even a custom wheelchair design from a local biker gang, complete with flame decals and voice-activated lights. Clara's tip about similar scams led police to uncover a statewide operation. The fake enforcers were part of a ring of security guards and wannabe vigilantes who intimidated residents into paying fake fines. Their leader, a disgraced private contractor named Victor Klein, was arrested in a motel outside town. Clara testified in court, her presence as commanding as it had been on that sidewalk. The jury didn't need much convincing. The video, Ethan's bloodied jeans, and Clara's unflinching testimony sealed the case. Klein got 8 years, his crew lesser sentences. Maplewood never quite returned to its old quiet. Neighbors grew closer, united by the incident. Ethan, once shy, became a local hero. He and Clara returned to the crosswalk weeks later, where he painted a massive dragon across the pavement with red chalk. Volunteers turned it into a permanent mural, its scales gleaming under weatherproof sealant. Below it, in bold letters, read, "Here a boy stood. Here a woman fought. Here we rise together." Clara declined most interviews, but when pressed, she'd say, "I'm no hero. I'm a grandmother. And grandmothers don't let cowards touch their kids." Her words became a rallying cry, sparking legislation to crack down on fake enforcement scams. They called it the Caldwell Act. As for Ethan, he kept painting, his dragons fiercer with every stroke. And Clara? She fixed her porch swing, sipped her tea, and kept her cane closed just in case. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.